dear students and viewers, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our today's session. I am Murshida Imam, Assistant Professor, Dept. of English, Govt. Shahid, Suhrawardy College, Dhaka. Today I am going to continue a class for the students of Honours 3rd year, Dept. of English. My dear students, how are you? Hope you are fine and connected with our online classes. My dear students, you know we are reading Preface to the Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth, and in our previous class we completed reading para number 17, and so today we will start from para 18. Now get ready to do the class. In para 17, Wordsworth says that the aim of poetry is to give pleasure, and now in para 18 Wordsworth is saying that poetic pleasure is not mere idle amusement. Poetry is the most philosophic of all writings. The object of poetry is general and operative truth. It is the image of man and nature. The only restriction under which the poet works is the necessity of giving pleasure. From this para, I want to suggest you to make 3 explanations. Okay, mark those lines please, where Wordsworth says that poetry is the most philosophic of all writing. Mark this line from this para, my dear students. Poetry is the most philosophic of all writing. It is so. Its object is truth, not individual and local, but general and operative. Okay, then another line for you. Poetry is the image of man and nature. Poetry is the image of man and nature. Mark this line please for explanation, and also important for quotation. Okay, you can use this quotation while answering any question. That is, poetry is the image of man and nature. Then read those lines. Those are very, very important. That is, the poet writes under one restriction only, namely the necessity of giving immediate pleasure to a human being, possessed of that information which may be expected from him, not as a lawyer, a physician, a mariner, an astronomer, or a natural philosopher, but as a man. Mark those lines please, dear students. Those lines are very, very important for explanation. Okay, in para 19 Wordsworth says that the need of producing immediate pleasure is not a degradation of the poet's art. That is, knowledge is always built up by pleasure. Knowledge gained by both the poet and the man of science is pleasure. The difference is that while the knowledge of the poet is universal and cleaves to us as a necessary part of our existence, that of the man of science is a personal and individual acquisition. Okay, it's the main theme or main words of para number 19. In this para, we also see that Wordsworth asks a question and then he answers. That is, what then does the poet? He says, what then does the poet? Yes, then he answers in this way. That is, he considers man. Here he means the poet. Okay, he considers man and the objects that surround him as acting and reacting upon each other, so as to produce an infinite complexity of pain and pleasure. He considers man in his own nature and in his ordinary life as contemplating this with a certain quantity of immediate knowledge, with certain convictions, intuitions, and deductions which from habit acquire the quality of intuitions. He considers him as looking upon this complex scene of ideas and sensations and finding everywhere objects that immediately excite in him sympathies which from the necessities of his nature are accompanied by an overbalance of enjoyment. Okay, so here we see the function of poet. What does a poet do? Here we find the answer of the question. Okay, then go to para number 20, and this para is very important. Okay, my dear students, mark this para please. Here we'll find a number of explanations, and also those lines will be important for quotation, okay, while answering the broad questions. The main theme or the main words of para 20 is like that: the scientist studies through the intellect and his knowledge is superficial. The poet reaches to the soul of things. Wordsworth says, poetry is the breath and final spirit of all knowledge. The poetic truth is complementary to scientific truth. It gives to scientific truths emotions and feelings. In this para, mark the line please. Find out the line here, that is, he considers man and nature as essentially adapted to each other, and the mind of man as naturally the mirror of the fairest and most interesting properties of nature. Okay, mark this line please. This line is very important for explanation. Okay, here he means the poet. Okay, here also we see the function of a poet. How does a poet consider man and nature? Okay, he considers man and nature as essentially adapted to each other. Okay, if I want to explain this line, it will be like that. Wordsworth believes that man and nature are united inseparably to one another. Nature and man coexist in harmony. Okay, and now mark another line from this para please. Find out the line here, that is, the knowledge both of the poet and the man of science is pleasure, but the knowledge of the one cleaves to us as a necessary part of our existence, our natural unalienable inheritance. Okay, mark this line please. Another sentence from this para, my dear students, and this sentences or this line is very important for explanation. Okay, give 3 stars, marks 3 stars. Okay, this line, I am reading this line for you, that is, poetry is the breath and final spirit of all knowledge. It is the impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all science. Okay, that is, the superiority of poetry over science is described here. Okay, and another line for you, that is, find out the line, the poet binds together by passion and knowledge the vast empire of human society as it is spread over the whole earth and over all time. Okay, and the last line of this para is also very important for explanation and also for quotation, that is, poetry is the first and last of all knowledge. It is as immortal as the heart of man. Okay, I am repeating the line, my dear students. You should learn this sentence by heart. Okay, that is, what is poetry? Poetry is the first and last of all knowledge. It is as immortal as the heart of man. Now I want to explain this para for you once again, that is, poetry is superior to science. How, my dear students? That is, according to Wordsworth, we see that the scientist labors hard to discover truths. He finds pleasure in the discovery of these truths, but the truths which he discovers are of a particular and personal kind. The knowledge of both scientist and poet gives each pleasure, but the knowledge in both cases are quite different. The scientific man's knowledge is of a particular kind. It is a truth which cannot be shared by all humanity, and the pleasure from such knowledge is confined to the scientist alone. He enjoys it in solitude. The poet, on the other hand, gains knowledge which cleaves to us as a necessary part of our existence, and poetic truth can be shared by all humanity. It is derived from the basic principles of life, from a perception of the unity of nature and man. The poet's truth or knowledge is universal. In other words, a poet sings a song in which all humanity shares. Poetry is thus superior to science. Okay, is it clear to you, my dear students? Yes, and according to Wordsworth, that is, if we want to quote the line from the preface to the Lyrical Ballads, that is, we notice the exalted view of poetry and the poet as Wordsworth conceives of them. Science is restricted to the intellectual field and deals with particularities. The poet delves deep into the core of reality. He reaches far beneath the surface appearances to the permanent soul of things. Okay, and my students, here we also see that if I also want to explain the line for you, that is why poetry why and how is poetry the breath and final spirit of all knowledge. Okay, poetry is the breath and final spirit of knowledge. How? Okay, my dear students, I want to explain this line for you. That is, the poet has a higher sensibility than other men. Hence, the truth which he discovers is charged with heightened feeling and emotion. Poetry is the breath and final spirit of all knowledge. It is the impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all science. The poet talks of universal truths and basic laws of human existence and nature. It can be shared by all. A poet looks before and after. The poetic truth involves the permanent feelings of the human heart. The poet affords love and binds human society. Poetry is as immortal as the heart of man. The perception of the universal truth in nature and man gives deep pleasure to the poet. The poet shares it with all humanity. The perception of this universal truth in nature and man excites emotions and feelings in the poet, which he expresses in order to share with humanity. His appeal, therefore, is to the intellect as well as to the heart of man, unlike the appeal of the scientist's truth, which is to the intellect alone. So, poetry is the first and last of all knowledge, and it is immortal as the heart of man. My dear students, para number 20, I mentioned earlier, that is, it is very important for explanation and also for quotation and also for questions. Okay, so that's all about para number 20, 18, 19 and 20. Okay, now we'll go to para number 21 and 22. At first I am telling you about the main theme of para number 21 and 22. Here the poet thinks and feels in the spirit of human passions. As such, a poet who uses artificial devices of poetic diction must be having a poor opinion of his own calling. The language of poetry cannot differ from the language spoken by men. In dramatic compositions, especially, the language should be such as used by men. Meter obeys certain laws to which the poet and the reader both willingly submit. Meter is thus the only difference between the language of poetry and the language really spoken by men. Now, from para 22, mark those lines, please, my dear students. Find out the line there, that is, the poet thinks and feels in the spirit of human passions. Okay, mark this line, please. This line is very important for explanation. And from this para, find out the line, that is, but poets do not write for poets alone but for men. This line is also very important for explanation. Okay, in this para we also see that Wordsworth's defense of meter comes as a surprise among all the revolutionary talk of discarding outmoded and artificial devices of the 18th century poetic practice. Poetic diction is rejected on the score that it is artificial, capricious, and arbitrary. He advocates the return to the ordinary language of humble man. However, he is ready to allow meter as a part of poetry. And what is strange is that he justifies the use of meter on the basis of tradition and authority. Wordsworth says that he has dealt with the deep and universal passions of men. He is concerned with the entire world of nature. He could have, he admits, written in prose as well. His decision of choosing verse was governed by the fact that he wanted to heighten charm and pleasure. The use of meter was an added source of pleasure. The end of poetry is to provide excitement in coexistence with an overbalance of pleasure. This line we'll find in another para. And here to explain the use of meter, that is we have used this sentence, that is, excitement is an unusual state of mind. In such a state of excitement, ideas and feelings do not follow one another in the usual or regular order. There might be incoherence in the expression of ideas. If emotional excitement is too powerful, it may be carried out of control. In such cases, meter offers a suitable restraint. So, meter has a restraining and tempering effect. Wordsworth takes recourse to authority in his defense of meter. People of all ages have proclaimed the charm and pleasure accorded to poetry through the use of meter. He has simply followed tradition by writing in metrical language. But my dear students, one of my class, I have also discussed this matter, that is, Coleridge was the first to attack Wordsworth's views on meter, and he exposed the inherent weakness of the defense. Coleridge contends that meter is essential to poetry because it is the main difference between prose and poetry. There are certain phrases which are beautiful in poetry but quite unsuitable for prose. Similarly, some phrases may be more appropriate to poetry. The arrangement of words differ in prose and poetry. He declares, I write in meter because I am about to use a language different from that of prose. Unfortunately for Wordsworth, having declared that there is no essential difference between prose and poetry, he could not declare meter to be so essential a difference. He is forced to make vague and rather weak excuses for having used meter. So, we see that Coleridge is a great critic of Wordsworth here. Okay, Coleridge, however, agrees with much of what Wordsworth says about the powers of meter. That is, he is regretful that Wordsworth did not deal with it in detail. Having considered meter only in relation with language and diction, fundamental concepts could not be discussed clearly. Coleridge, with his series of arguments on meter, arrives at the very opposite conclusion to that of Wordsworth. He asserts there may be, is, and ought to be an essential difference between the language of prose and of metrical composition. Well, students, that's all about para number 18 to 22, and that's all for today. And in our next class, we will start from para 23. Okay. Now, my dear students, take a homework, please. You must have to write down the answer of this question, my dear students. Okay. And the explanations, the lines important for explanations which I mentioned while reading the text. Okay. You have to write down the explanation. Okay. You have to complete the explanation. Okay. Write down in this way, that is, explain the following sentences. Okay, those lines which I mentioned earlier. Okay, all those sentences you have to explain. Okay, it's your homework and a question for you, and you must have to write down the answer of this question. Okay, but student, write down the question, please. Why is poetry superior to science? Okay, according to Wordsworth, according to William Wordsworth, why is poetry superior to science? I am repeating the question, my dear students. Why is poetry superior to science? According to Wordsworth, why is poetry superior to science? Okay, that's all, my dear students. No more today. In our next class, we will start from para number 23. Then, goodbye. Allah Hafiz.